Imagine, just for a second, trying to understand the ultimate fate of an entire nation. But you have this very specific, really strict set of restrictions.
Right.
You are absolutely not allowed to read a single news headline. You can't look at, any political op-eds. There are no hot takes on social media.
That sounds almost impossible these days.
Right. And you're completely barred from reading any historical narrative essays. You are basically locked in a room, and the only thing you have to understand, the survival, the struggles, and the future of millions of people is just raw, unfiltered data.
Wow. I mean, how would you even do it?
Exactly. And that is the exact mission we are embarking on today.
Yeah. It forces a complete paradigm shift in how you process information, because when you strip away the narrative, the rhetoric, and, the inherent biases of storytelling.
But you're everywhere.
Exactly. You are left with nothing but the structural reality. You really have to look at the skeletal system of a society.
I love that, the skeletal system.
Yeah.
For those of you listening who are just exhausted by the incredible amount of noise out there, who want to bypass the pundits and get straight to the bedrock truth of how a society functions, or, well, fails to function, this deep dive is custom-tailored for you.
Absolutely.
We are unpacking a massive, highly detailed document today. It's titled the Multidimensional Socioeconomic and Human Development Analysis Report on Afghanistan. And the subtitle is An Empirical Study Based on Macroeconomic, Health, Education, and Governance Data.
It is a truly remarkable collection of empirical data. I mean, we are looking at a stack of sources that systematically cover macroeconomics, public health, education, and governance.
And it tracks these metrics over several decades, right?
Yes, exactly. It tracks them to identify the underlying structural trends.
Okay, before we get into the actual numbers, I really want to set the stage for you.
Yeah.
Because the visual presentation of this report tells you a lot about its methodology.
It really does. It's so striking.
If you are holding this report right now, the aesthetic is just incredibly stark. I mean, it is the absolute definition of minimalist academic formatting.
Pure white backgrounds everywhere.
Yes, every single page, pure white. The text is perfectly center-aligned. The data points are separated by these extremely thin clinical gray divider lines.
And no pictures.
Right. There are no distracting photos of landscapes, no portraits of political figures, no editorial cartoons meant to sway your emotions. It is literally just hard, undeniable numbers.
Which makes this a perfect moment to establish our own parameters for this conversation, I think.
Oh, yeah. Good call. Let's do that.
Because, this specific region of the world is surrounded by incredibly complex, highly charged political narratives from all sides.
Yeah, you really can't escape it normally.
Right. But today, we are leaving the politics entirely at the door. We are not taking sides, nor are we endorsing any political viewpoints, left, right, or center. Our job today is to impartially report on the empirical content provided in these sources.
Exactly. We are simply here to convey the facts, analyze the socioeconomic ideas contained in the original material, and, well, help you understand the mechanics of what the data itself is actually doing.
Right.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because looking at a country exclusively through the lens of pure statistics reveals these surprising, often deeply contradictory human stories.
It's true. You think you know the story of a place based on what you see on the evening news.
Right, but then you look at a spreadsheet and the math tells you a completely different, often far more complicated story.
That is the beauty and honestly the tragedy of multidimensional data. The numbers in isolation are just ink on a page or pixels on a screen. Data is always most valuable when we connect the dots,
Yeah, when we figure out the mechanisms behind it.
Exactly. Our goal is to look at the specific data points, and synthesize the why and the how. Like, how do these macroeconomic shifts actually impact the millions of individual human lives represented in those minimalist charts?
So to figure that out, we have to start at the absolute foundation. Before we can understand the economy, before we can even begin to talk about trade deficits or inflation or healthcare access, we have to understand the people.
Yes. Who is actually living in the system?
Right. And the very first piece of data we have brings us to a phenomenon that demographic researchers call the youth bulge.
The youth bulge is a massive structural feature of a population, and in this specific data set, it is operating at an absolute extreme.
Just how extreme are we talking?
Well, the demographic breakdown shows that the 0 to 14 age demographic makes up a staggering 46% to 50% of the total population.
Half.
Yeah.
Literally half the country is under 14.
Yes.
Let me just paint a picture of this visualization for you, because seeing it makes it so visceral. It is an area chart tracking 3 age brackets,
Mm.
0 to 14, 15 to 64, and 65 plus.
Right, the classic demographic tiers.
Then literally half of the graphical space, half of the entire chart is just children. It's this massive, heavy band of data right at the bottom.
And right below that area chart, there is this sharply rising line chart tracking something called the child dependency ratio.
Yes. And whoever designed this report actually drew a bright red dashed circle around a specific node where the line shoots upward.
And the note next to it says, extremely high social dependency burden.
Extremely high feels like an understatement. What does that actually mean economically?
Well, that red circle is arguably the most important data point for understanding the country's economic baseline. The dependency ratio is an economic concept that measures the ratio of dependents, meaning people younger than 15 or older than 64 to the working age population.
Basically, how many people are consuming resources versus how many people are theoretically capable of producing resources.
Exactly. In this data, the child dependency ratio spiked from an already elevated 75.9% to nearly 100%. And in some tracked periods, it actually breached 100%.
Wait. If the math is hitting 100%, that means for every single working-age adult in the country, there is one child they have to completely support. It's a 1-to-1 ratio.
That's right. Every single person who is in that 15 to 64 age bracket is carrying the absolute undivided economic weight of a dependent child.
Wow. Think about your own household budget for a second, Imagine if half the people living under your roof were under the age of 14.
That's a lot of kids.
None of them can legally work. None of them can contribute to the mortgage or the grocery bill.
Uh,
But all of them are growing rapidly. They need increasing amounts of food. They need new clothes, medicine, textbooks.
it's an immense financial pressure.
Now, take that massive, suffocating financial pressure and scale it up to an entire nation. If every adult is just barely keeping one child fed, how can a society ever build long-term wealth?
From a purely macroeconomic perspective, it becomes almost mathematically impossible to build wealth under those conditions.
Really, impossible.
Pretty much. When an economy has a dependency ratio that high, a concept called capital accumulation essentially halts.
Okay, break that down for me. Capital accumulation.
Sure, so in a healthy economy, adults produce more than they immediately consume. That surplus allows them to save. Those savings go into banks, and banks lend that money to build factories, pave highways, or invest in high-tech infrastructure.
Right, the money goes to work.
But here, every single dollar generated by the working class is immediately devoured by the absolute bare necessities of keeping that massive youth population alive. There is no surplus at all.
So the entire economy is trapped in a permanent state of triage.
Yes, a permanent triage.
And what makes this demographic pressure cooker even more intense is where all these people live. Because usually when we look at data from countries experiencing a massive population boom, we see an equally massive migration to cities, right?
Right. Globally, a youth bulge almost always triggers rapid urbanization.
People flock to urban centers to find work.
Exactly. Because cities have dense labor markets, factories, and service economies that can absorb a growing workforce. But the data in this report shows something completely counterintuitive.
Yeah, the urbanization is barely crawling. Over the tracked multi-decade period, the urban population only crept up from just over 11% to roughly 25.7%.
That is incredibly slow for a population growing this fast.
And the chart they use to visualize this is wild. It's a 100% stacked area chart. Imagine a giant square taking up the page.
Okay.
The vast, overwhelming majority of that square is this massive, light-colored block representing the rural population. And down at the very bottom, taking up just a sliver of space, is a dark band representing the urbanites.
It really emphasizes the scale.
It looked like a massive ocean of rural citizens sitting on top of a tiny strip of urban sand. There is a little pointer on the chart noting that even today, roughly 3/4 of the population is rural.
If we connect this rural reality to the youth bulge we just discussed, the mechanism of poverty becomes incredibly clear.
How so?
Well, you have a booming population of children, right, which requires massive social services. But they aren't concentrated in dense city centers where a government can build one giant high school to serve 5,000 kids, or one centralized hospital for 100,000 people.
Oh, wow. Yeah. They're predominantly rural, geographically fractured, and spread out over incredibly difficult mountainous terrain.
Right. The logistical friction of that is staggering.
If I'm an international aid group, or even a central government trying to deliver basic services, I can't just lay down a city grid. I have to physically transport teachers, doctors, and resources across hundreds of miles of unpaved roads to reach a dozen kids at a time.
Precisely. It turns a severe demographic challenge into a geographic crisis. The cost of laying down power lines, building water purification infrastructure, or even just distributing standardized textbooks is multiplied tenfold by that rural distribution.
It eats up everything.
Yeah. It means that the limited capital the country does have is burned up entirely on the friction of logistics.
Okay, so we have established a baseline reality here. We've got a booming, highly dispersed rural youth population supported by working-age adults who have zero surplus capital.
That's the foundation, yes.
So the natural next question is, how are those working-age adults actually making a living? How is money moving through this system?
Right, we are transitioning into the macroeconomic data now.
And it paints a picture of a system that looks less like an economy and more like a high-wire balancing act. Let's look at slide 3.
The first core macroeconomic indicator the report isolates is gross national income, or GNI, per capita. And it's important to note they use the Atlas method to calculate this.
Let's pause there because I don't want to gloss over the terminology. What is the Atlas method and why does it matter here?
Sure. The Atlas method is a technique used by organizations like the World Bank to smooth out extreme short-term fluctuations in exchange rates and inflation.
Okay, so it filters out the noise.
Exactly. Instead of looking at a single year's currency value, which might completely crash for a month due to a political panic, giving you a distorted view of the economy, the Atlas method averages exchange rates over a 3-year period. It lets us see the actual underlying trajectory of national wealth.
Got it. So it shows us the real trend line, not just the market panics.
Yeah.
And the visualization they use for this smooth data is a step bar chart.
Yes.
It's colored in this deep, serious navy blue against that pure white background. And when you look at the far left of the timeline, the GNI starts at a near invisible low of about $10 per capita.
$10 for the year.
Unbelievable.
Hmm.
But then you see this steady upward trajectory. It climbs step by step, reaching a peak of around $670. There's a clear upward arrow highlighting this growth.
That looks like a massive success story on paper.
It does. But then in the chart literally adds a text box here pointing to the peak that says trend reversal. The bars just plunge aggressively back down.
And that plunge, that trend reversal, is vital to understand because it reveals the fundamental fragility of the system. That long period of growth, climbing from $10 up to $670, it was, mechanically speaking, an illusion of sustainability.
An illusion. But the money was real, right? The chart shows it going up. The navy blue bars are right there.
The money was real, yes. But the source of the money was entirely artificial.
What do you mean by artificial?
Well, sustainable, durable economic growth comes from domestic industry. It comes from a country building manufacturing plants, increasing agricultural yields, or developing a service and tech sector that can export value to the rest of the world.
Right. You build something, you sell it, you make money.
But this fragile growth wasn't built on a foundation of domestic machinery.
Oh, I see. It's like a Silicon Valley startup surviving entirely on massive rounds of venture capital funding without ever actually selling a profitable product.
That is a perfect metaphor.
The valuation of the company looks absolutely incredible on paper. The lines are all going up, but there is no actual revenue engine.
Exactly. The venture capital in this scenario was external influxes of geopolitical capital. We are talking about billions of dollars in foreign aid, massive international military spending, and global development grants.
So all that money just flooded the zone.
It flowed into the country and created an artificial secondary economy. You had construction booms to build bases for international forces, a surge in catering companies to feed aid workers, and logistics firms hired to move foreign supplies.
But none of that generates permanent, exportable wealth for the citizens.
Exactly. And those capital flows fluctuated wildly based on the geopolitical priorities of the countries sending the money. When the geopolitical winds shifted and the international investors decided to pull out,
That artificial service economy instantly collapsed.
yep, the money evaporated because the domestic foundation was never actually built.
That perfectly explains the plunge. But here's where it gets really interesting. Even during those boom years, when the GNI was technically climbing up to that $670 peak, the reality on the ground for a regular person wasn't actually improving much.
Not at all, because of the purchasing power crisis.
Right. Having more dollars in your pocket means absolutely nothing if the value of those dollars is collapsing. And that brings us to the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, which measures inflation.
Right. Specifically, it measures the cost of a standard basket of goods. Think basic flour, cooking oil, fuel. The things a family absolutely needs to survive.
This chart is just staggering. It's a smooth line chart, and the designers use a stark gray shaded area to highlight an aggressive, violent spike in prices.
The inflation spike.
Yeah, the CPI rockets from an early baseline of 63.5 all the way up to 160.5. And the data label is placed right at the peak to show that absolute maximum jump.
Think about the mechanics of that inflation for a family living in that rural ocean we described earlier. Let's say, due to the artificial economic boom, your daily income goes from $2 to $5.
You might feel like your life is improving.
Right. But if the cost of basic imported cooking oil and wheat quadruples in that exact same time period, your actual purchasing power has plummeted. You are mathematically making more money, but you are functionally poorer.
Wow. You can't eat the GNI statistics.
Exactly.
And inflation is fundamentally regressive, isn't it?
Yeah.
If I'm wealthy and the price of steak doubles, maybe I just buy chicken. But if I'm already living on the absolute margin and the price of the cheapest, most basic calorie wheat triples, I don't have a substitute.
You don't. You just starve.
Which perfectly segues into the most revealing data point about the day-to-day reality for these citizens, the structure of the labor market itself.
Yes. According to the data, between 90.5% and 95.5% of the total workforce is trapped in what economists classify as vulnerable employment.
The chart for this is a donut chart, and it really emphasizes the sheer scale of the problem. There is a massive dark gray ring that goes almost all the way around the circle.
It takes up almost the entire thing.
Yeah. With a huge 90% plus right in the center, and a black arrow pointing to it saying, extremely high proportion of self-employed and unpaid family workers.
Over 90%.
So what does this actually mean? If I'm a listener and I drop into this economy, what does my life look like in vulnerable employment?
It means you are entirely disconnected from the formal economy. You don't have a boss. You don't have a steady salary, a signed contract, or predictable hours.
No stability at all.
None. You have absolutely zero safety net, no health insurance, no retirement pension, no paid sick leave. You are likely doing unpredictable day labor in construction or agriculture, selling small goods on a dusty street corner, or, very commonly, you are an unpaid family worker.
Let's drill down into that term, unpaid family worker. That sounds bleak.
It is. It means you work full-time on the family's small agricultural plot or tending a family-owned market stall, but you don't receive a wage. Your pay is simply a share of whatever food or meager profit the family generates that day.
So let's create a micro story based on this data.
Yeah.
Imagine it's a Tuesday. You are an unpaid family worker. You don't have savings because your country's dependency ratio consumes all surplus capital.
Right.
The inflation rate means the grain you buy costs double what it did last year. If you twist your ankle on that Tuesday and cannot work the fields, what happens on Wednesday?
On Wednesday, you don't eat. When 95% of your population exists in vulnerable employment, you do not have a modern, resilient economy. You have a pure survival economy.
Everyone is living in a state of permanent daily precarity.
Yes. There is no capacity to take economic risks, no ability to innovate, and no buffer against macroeconomic shocks.
And because 95% of the country is just trying to survive locally, fighting for daily calories, the country as a whole cannot compete globally. They aren't building microchips or designing software.
No, they aren't.
Which logically results in the massive trade chasm detailed later in the report. Let's look at slide 14.
The trade deficit numbers are almost incomprehensible for a nation of this size. The data shows merchandise imports goods brought into the country surging to $7 to $8 billion and sometimes higher in a single year.
That's a massive amount of imports.
Meanwhile, their exports are practically non-existent. The chart uses these massive braces to show a giant bar of imports dwarfing a tiny microscopic bar of exports, with a note declaring a severe trade imbalance.
Okay, I need to push on the mechanics of this because my brain immediately sees a contradiction.
Go for it.
If we do not export goods, we do not earn foreign currency like US dollars. And if we do not have foreign currency, we cannot buy imports from the global market. So if they are earning basically $0 from the rest of the world, how on earth are they paying for $8 billion worth of imported goods?
It's the essential question of their macroeconomic survival. In a standard economy, the balance of payments works like a ledger. You sell goods to the world to earn foreign capital, which you use to buy the things you can't produce at home. When you import $8 billion but export nothing, you have a catastrophic current account deficit. The only way a country bridges that multi-billion-dollar gap, the only way it literally keeps the lights on and imports enough food to prevent mass famine, is through massive external life support.
meaning international grants, global aid packages, and remittances from citizens who fled the country to work abroad and send cash back.
Precisely. Remember our very first point, the child dependency ratio.
Yeah?
This trade deficit is the exact macroeconomic mirror of that. The entire nation is operating as a dependent on the global economy. It is not generating its own sustenance. It is being fed by external actors.
Wow. And if those external actors cut the funding?
The capacity to import $8 billion worth of food, fuel, and medicine vanishes overnight.
And the survival economy collapses entirely.
Entirely.
Okay, so let's summarize the foundation we've just built. We have a rapidly booming, highly dispersed rural youth population. They are trapped in a day-to-day survival economy where 95% of people have no formal jobs. Their G&I growth was a venture capital illusion. Their purchasing power has been destroyed by hyperinflation, and the entire national ledger is on global life support.
It's a very bleak picture.
It really is, and that bleak reality leads us perfectly into the next major dimension of this report, the human capital paradox. In an environment this severe, what happens to the minds and bodies of the people?
That's the real question.
The data here reveals a tragic, structural self-sabotage, but simultaneously, it reveals one of the most incredible, surprising victories in the entire report.
Let's examine the tragedy first. The education crisis. In a knowledge-based global economy, human capital, the education and skill level of your workforce, is your primary engine for growth.
And the numbers here show that engine is fundamentally broken.
Very broken.
The raw numbers on school enrollment are tough to process. The data estimates that between 1.39 and 1.59 million primary school-aged children are completely out of school.
1.5 million kids.
And the visualization they use to break this down is brilliant, but heartbreaking. It's a waffle chart, basically an infographic. Imagine three little human silhouettes standing side by side, representing the total out-of-school population.
Okay.
Two of those three figures are shaded in a specific low-saturation color to represent girls. There's a note explicitly stating, out of every 3 out-of-school children, approximately 2 are female.
The gender disparity is massive and systemic. The data estimates roughly 867,000 to 957,000 girls are out of school, compared to 528,000 to 635,000 boys.
And that childhood gap bleeds directly into the adult literacy rates on the next slide. Overall adult literacy, anyone 15 and older, is trapped in this dismal range between 31.4% and 37.2%.
That's incredibly low.
Now, the youth literacy rate, looking just at the 15 to 24-year-olds, does show a glimmer of progress, pushing up to 62.6%. But the gender gap within that progress is a chasm.
It's a huge divide.
The report uses a dumbbell plot for this. It shows a line connecting the male literacy rate to the female literacy rate. And the physical distance between those two dots on the chart is staggering. There is a solid black arrow right in the middle emphasizing the gap between generations, but also the sheer distance between men and women.
This is where we have to look past the obvious human rights implications, as vital as they are, and look at the raw macroeconomic reality.
Right.
From a purely empirical standpoint, systematically excluding half of your population from the educational framework is an act of total economic self-sabotage.
Wait, let's connect this back to the dependency ratio we talked about in the very beginning. If you have a 1-to-1 dependency ratio, meaning every working adult is already carrying maximum weight, and you systematically block half your potential workforce from getting the education required to enter the formal modern economy.
You're shooting yourself in the foot.
You aren't just hurting girls.
Yeah.
You are artificially halving your country's GDP potential. You are forcing the remaining working men to carry double the economic weight in a survival economy.
That is exactly the macroeconomic math. Human capital has a compounding effect. Educated workers create higher value goods, start businesses, and increase the tax base, which allows the government to build more schools.
A virtuous cycle.
Yes. By denying education to the female half of the population, you ensure they remain trapped in that unpaid, vulnerable family labor category we discussed earlier. It absolutely guarantees that the dependency ratio will remain an unsolvable crisis for another entire generation.
You just can't win like that.
You cannot build a modern, competitive economy when you are intentionally running on only 50% of your human capital.
It is a devastating structural flaw.
Yeah.
But, and this is why looking at multidimensional data is so fascinating, right next to this bleak educational data is a data point that literally made me do a double take.
It's a massive, unexpected pivot.
It really is. Let's talk about the public health victory.
This is arguably the most compelling chart in the entire multidimensional report. Historically, maternal mortality of mothers dying during childbirth or pregnancy-related complications was at a devastating high. We are talking about 13,000 to 14,000 deaths every single year.
Which is an unimaginable tragedy at that scale. It hollows out entire communities.
But the empirical data shows a radical, undeniable shift. That number plummeted. Over the tracked period, it dropped all the way down to between 5,000 and 6,000 deaths a year.
Oh, wow. And the chart shows us exactly why and how it dropped. It is a dual-axis chart.
Right.
On the left axis, you have a bar chart representing the total number of maternal deaths. And you can see those bars dropping over time. On the right axis, you have a line chart moving the exact opposite direction, rising steadily year over year.
And that line represents the percentage of births attended by trained professional medical staff. It goes from a meager 12.4% up to almost 59%.
Visually, it creates what statisticians call a scissors effect. As the line for skilled health workers goes up, the bars for maternal deaths go down. They cross each other like a pair of open scissors closing.
It's a beautiful correlation to see.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
The researchers actually drew a dash circle right around the point where those two lines intersect. They added a text box that says, strong negative correlation between medical coverage and mortality.
It is undeniable mathematical proof that targeted interventions work. When you deploy skilled health workers, when you train midwives and get them into these rural communities, thousands upon thousands of mothers survive who otherwise would have died.
But this raises a profound, almost paradoxical question. Think about everything we've discussed for the past half hour.
Yeah, the macro context.
We established a country with no domestic wealth, a 95% survival economy, hyperinflation, and the logistical nightmare, where 75% of the population lives in hard-to-reach rural mountains. So how did they manage to quintuple the rate of trained medical staff?
Right. How do you pull off a logistical healthcare miracle in a failed macroeconomic state? If the central government can't build a functioning economy, how are they training tens of thousands of midwives and deploying them to remote villages?
The answer is they aren't, at least not entirely through top-down central government action.
The data strongly implies, and the history of the region confirms, that this medical victory was largely driven by hyper-targeted, localized health interventions. It was funded and executed by a vast network of NGOs, international aid organizations, and community-level health initiatives.
So instead of trying to fix the entire broken national system, they bypassed it.
Exactly. They utilized vertical interventions. Instead of trying to build massive, centralized, multi-million-dollar hospitals in a country with no roads, these organizations focused on hyper-local logistics.
That makes so much sense.
They trained local women from specific villages to be midwives, equipped them with basic, highly effective medical kits, and let them operate within their own communities.
That is incredibly hopeful. It proves a vital concept. You don't have to fix the entire national economy before you can start saving lives. Even when the broader macroeconomy is completely failing, highly targeted, ground-level interventions can yield profound, immediate, life-saving results.
It is a testament to the power of specific, localized action. And in multidimensional analysis, there is always a but. We have to look at the whole board.
Right.
These targeted interventions are heroic, but they are constantly fighting against an invisible ceiling. They can only go so far before they hit structural walls.
Which brings us to Section 4 of our deep dive, the invisible systemic bottlenecks. We've seen the ground-level work can succeed, but let's look at the underlying governance and environmental data. Because this data acts like gravity, it constantly threatens to pull all of that localized progress back down to earth.
Let's turn to the metrics that measure governance and stability on Slide 9. Institutions like the World Bank use highly standardized, aggregated metrics to evaluate how a state actually functions. One of the most critical is the Control of Corruption score.
Just to give you listening some context on how this math works, this score is usually measured on a standard normal distribution scale. It ranges from positive 2.5, which represents the best, most transparent, highly functioning governance possible. Think of a highly regulated Scandinavian democracy.
Right.
Down to negative 2.5, which represents an absolute kleptocracy where the state exists merely to loot its citizens.
The estimate for this country sits dismally between Megat 1.15 and Angus 1.67.
And the chart they use to display this is a horizontal diverging bar chart. The zero axis is right in the middle. And every single bar for every single year pulls heavily to the left, deep into the negative territory.
And never crosses into the positive.
Never. The researchers even added a pale red background to the negative side, like a warning zone, and added a label, Systemic Governance Bottlenecks. This score places them consistently in the bottom 15% of all nations globally for corruption control.
But the next metric is even more shocking because it speaks to the physical reality of the state, the political stability and absence of violence or terrorism percentile ranking.
Yes. I looked at this trend line on slide 10, and it is literally hugging the absolute bottom axis of the graph. It's so low you almost can't see it. There is a little magnifying glass graphic zooming in on the line just to show that it exists because it fluctuates between 0.4% and 2.8%.
To be in the 0.4th percentile globally means that 99.6% of the rest of the world is measurably more politically stable than you are. For all practical economic purposes, it is a zero.
So what does this actually mean for the economy? We obviously know violence is horrific for human life and human rights, but mechanically, how does a 0.4% stability score destroy an economy?
In institutional economics, we call this a systemic bottleneck. It's the concept that no matter how much water you pour into the top of a funnel, the water can only flow out as fast as the narrowest part of the neck allows.
Bottleneck chokes the flow.
Exactly. In this country, governance and stability are the bottlenecks.
Walk me through how that actually works on the ground.
Let's go back to our public health victory. You can have the best NGOs in the world training midwives. But if the government is entirely corrupt, the international funding meant for clinic supplies is skimmed off by local officials before it ever buys a single bandage.
Ugh, that's brutal.
Or let's look at their rural farmers. An aid group can lay down a new paved road to connect those rural farmers to an urban market so they can finally escape vulnerable employment.
Right, access to markets.
But if there is zero political stability and active, violent conflict, that new road gets blown up by insurgents. Or local warlords set up checkpoints and extort the farmers for every penny of profit they make.
It's the foundation. You cannot build a durable road, a lasting school system, or a stable currency if the foundation of the state is constantly violently shifting like tectonic plates.
Everything you try to build is just built on sand.
The corruption and violence act as a universal tax on every single attempt at human development.
And that relentless instability breeds another completely silent killer. When a state cannot regulate its own functions, it cannot protect its citizens from environmental hazards.
We don't often associate extreme environmental pollution with non-industrialized, low-income nations, though. We think of smog as a byproduct of massive wealth generation.
Exactly. But look at the data on PM 2.5 exposure on slide 11.
This genuinely shocked me when I read the report. When you think of toxic air, you think of massive steel factories, coal power plants, and sprawling megacities. But this region is overwhelmingly rural and has almost no heavy industry.
Yet the PM 2.5 exposure, those are the microscopic toxic particles in the air that penetrate deep into your lung tissue and bloodstream, is chronically sitting at 61 to 77 micrograms per cubic meter.
To give the listener the necessary context to understand how dangerous that is, the World Health Organization's safe limit baseline for PM 2.5 is 10.
10. And they were breathing 77.
The chart literally draws a thick black dashed line down at the very bottom where the WHO safe limit is, and then draws a giant, towering double arrow pointing all the way up to where the country's actual air quality sits, highlighting the massive lethal gap.
It's a huge disparity.
So, if they don't have sprawling factory districts, where is all this toxic pollution coming from?
The answer is hidden in the carbon emission structure on slide 12. Their total carbon emissions on a global scale are very low. But if you look at the stacked area chart breaking down where those emissions come from, you see a specific band expanding rapidly: transport CO2 emissions.
Transport, like cars and trucks.
Yes, it surged from 0.24 megatons to over 4.54 megatons. The chart specifically circles this transport area and notes significant growth in transport emissions reflecting unregulated infrastructure expansion.
Okay, let's unpack the mechanics of this.
Right.
Why transport? Why does moving things around create 77 micrograms of toxic air in a country with no money?
This tells a hidden, tragic story of unregulated economic survival. Remember, the vulnerable employment data. 95% of people surviving day to day.
Right.
People are surviving by trading and moving goods however they physically can. Because there is no central environmental regulation, no functioning governance, neighboring countries use this nation as a dumping ground. They import incredibly old, cheap, highly polluting diesel vehicles from the 1990s that have been legally banned everywhere else.
So they are driving fleets of mechanical dinosaurs.
Exactly. And they are driving these highly polluting engines on a massive network of unpaved, dusty, unregulated rural roads, which kicks up immense amounts of particulate matter.
And what about inside their homes?
Furthermore, because there is no centralized functioning electricity grid reaching that 75% rural population, families have to survive the harsh winters somehow. They rely on burning dirty, solid fuels wood, animal dung, low-grade scavenged coal inside their poorly ventilated homes just to cook food and stay warm.
So the air itself has become a lethal byproduct of their desperate economic survival.
Yeah.
You breathe poison just to cook your dinner or to drive your meager goods to the market in a banned truck. It's a devastating paradox.
It is. And it makes the maternal health gains we discussed earlier even more miraculous because those localized healthcare workers are operating in an environment that is actively physically making the entire population sick. It is a constant battle against the environment itself.
We have looked at so many individual puzzle pieces today.
Wow.
We've looked at demographic youth bulges, hyperinflation, trade deficits, educational self-sabotage, localized health miracles, systemic corruption, and toxic air.
It is a lot to hold in your head at once.
It is, but the researchers knew that.
Mhm.
So the final section of this report, slide 15, provides a master visualization to help us pull way back and see the entire board at once.
This is the grand synthesis of the multidimensional analysis. The researchers plotted the 5 core dimensions of the state economy, education, health, environment, and governance on a standardized 1 to 10 scale using a radar chart.
Also known as a spiderweb chart. For you listening, imagine a bicycle wheel with 5 spokes radiating out from the center. If a country is perfectly balanced, highly developed, and functioning well, the data points connect to form a nice, large, even pentagon near the outer edge of the wheel. It shows strength across all dimensions.
Right, a balanced shape.
But this chart, it is completely violently warped.
It is highly irregular, and the shape tells the entire story of the nation in a single glance.
It bulges way out on the health spoke, stretching toward the edge, visually reflecting that massive, heroic drop in maternal mortality we talked about. But then it violently caves inward, almost collapsing to the very center hub on the governance and environment spokes.
It looks broken.
It looks like a wheel that has been smashed on one side by a sledgehammer. If you tried to put this wheel on a cart and roll it, it would immediately crash.
And that irregular smash shape synthesizes the 3 core takeaways of the entire empirical analysis. The researchers even provide 3 concise bullet points next to the chart to summarize decades of data.
Let's hear them.
First, population and education. The demographic dependency pressure is a ticking clock. It requires emergency, immediate intervention, specifically in the massive deficit of female education.
Because if they don't educate the girls, the demographic dividend, the potential economic power of all those youth eventually entering the workforce, turns into a demographic disaster of permanent, compounded poverty.
Precisely. Second takeaway, health and the economy. The medical gains are undeniably real. Thousands of mothers are surviving today who would have died a decade ago. But those social gains are incredibly fragile.
Because of the economy.
Yes, high inflation and a 95% vulnerable employment rate threaten to wipe them out at any moment. If families suddenly can't afford imported food because the currency collapses further, malnutrition will spike and mortality will go right back up regardless of how many midwives you train.
And the third takeaway is the anchor dragging the entire system down.
Governance.
The extreme, near-zero lack of political stability, the toxic environmental risks, and the rampant corruption represent the ultimate cap on the country's potential.
You just can't build on top of that.
Without stabilizing the state, without building a foundation of basic law, predictability, and safety, all other localized investments are fleeting. You can't out-innovate a broken state forever.
You really can't.
I want you, the listener, to just pause for a second and internalize this data. Consider what it would be like to try to manage your own life, your own household, with these metrics dictating your reality.
It's hard to even imagine.
Imagine trying to keep your family safe and healthy when every step forward you take, say, finally getting access to a trained midwife in your rural village, is threatened by the toxic, unregulated air your kids have to breathe every night. Imagine trying to save money for your children's future when the money in your pocket loses half its value before you could even get to the market.
It is an astonishing testament to human resilience that people survive, that they trade, that they educate who they can, and that they even find ways to improve their communities under these incredibly oppressive structural metrics.
It really is.
The data shows profound fragility, yes, but it also shows an undeniable, persistent will to survive.
So let's wrap up this journey. We started by looking at a demographic pressure cooker, a country where half the population is under 14, mostly living in hard-to-reach rural mountainous areas, creating a massive logistical and financial burden.
A huge baseline challenge.
We saw a macroeconomy built on the illusion of foreign aid, where GNI gains were instantly eaten alive by hyperinflation, leaving 95% of the population trapped in a day-to-day survival hustle with no safety net.
We examined the tragic, compounded human capital loss of systematically keeping girls out of school, but we contrasted that with the incredible, undeniable triumph of reducing maternal mortality through the targeted, localized deployment of skilled health workers.
And finally, we looked at the invisible bottlenecks that cap all of this potential: the near-zero political stability, the systemic corruption, and the deadly air pollution caused by the sheer, unregulated necessity of economic survival.
It's a massive amount of information.
It is heavy, it is complex, but it is real.
And understanding that reality, unfiltered by political narrative, stripped down to the empirical mechanisms of how a society functions, is the essential first step to figuring out how to actually meaningfully improve it.
Which leaves me with a final lingering question for you to mull over. We saw the warped data on that final radar chart. Governance and political stability are sitting at near absolute zero. The national central structure is effectively broken.
True.
Yet, despite that total absence of effective state governance, localized, targeted interventions manage to deploy medical staff, bypass the corruption, and save thousands upon thousands of mothers' lives.
They bypass the bottleneck.
So if a society can achieve a massive, undeniable public health victory in the total absence of a functioning national government, does that mean the future of human development in the world's most fragile places isn't about massive, top-down, multi-billion-dollar nation building? Does the raw data prove that the real sustainable future lies in hyper-local, ground-up, highly specific interventions? Something for you to ponder long after this deep dive ends.